What are you going to do when you bring me on today? You're gonna bring me on when the music goes out, or are you going to signal me, or? Hello, welcome to another Black Horizons program. We want to thank you for taking time out to join us once again. For the past 9 months, the Black community of St. John, New Brunswick has been receiving the services of a Black Outreach Employment Counselor. In today's program, we'll talk about the Black community in St. John, their employment needs, and the activities of the Employment Counselor in dealing with those needs. I have joining me Laurie Leslie of St. John, New Brunswick, who is the Outreach Employment Counselor. A very beautiful employment counselor, I might add. Laurie, welcome to the Black Horizons program. Before we talk about your activities as an employment counselor in St. John, I'd like to ask you a little bit about the Black community in St. John. I'm sure many of the viewers of the program will not be that familiar with the Black community. First of all, how many Blacks are there in St. John?
Well, there's no set number. No one has a survey that says there are 3,000 Black people in St. John or there are 2,600 Black people in St. John. We would like to have a demographic study done. It's been attempted in the past. We've never really got anything, a final report to tell us exactly where we stand. A good estimate would be 1,500 to 1,800 Black people.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you have any idea how many families that would represent? Would it be 200 or 300 families?
Approximately 300.
Right. What about the organizations in the community? Are there many organizations in the Black community in St. John?
There are 3 main organizations in St. John. The WABC, they're a lower level. They're very quiet about their activities. It's a women's auxiliary group of the Black community, and they do a lot of working in helping just different people in the community, but they're very quiet about what they do. How else could I explain them? It's just a group of women together. They get a lot of results, but they don't publicize their activities.
Mm-hmm.
We have the NAACP, which is the national,
For New Brunswick?
the New Brunswick Association for Colored People. I don't really know a lot about their activities.
I know that the NBA, the Association for Advancement of Colored People in this province, hasn't been very active of late. Is that the situation in St. John?
I really couldn't say whether they've been active or not. I haven't seen anything that they've been doing, so I really couldn't give you a good viewpoint on what they do.
Well, you mentioned there were 3 groups. What's the third group?
The third is my sponsor, and they're Prude Incorporated in the city. Prude stands for Pride of Race, Unity, and Dignity Through Education, and that is their main focus, is education. And they've set up my office. We've been going for 9 months. Prude is the organization in St. John right now that's starting to solidify. It's really starting to look at the needs and the aims of the Black people in the city.
Mm-hmm. Do they have, other than your project, your employment project, do they have other programs? What are some of the other kinds of things that Prude gets involved in?
Mostly they put workshops on to help the Black people, show them the resource people in the community that they can go to, give them information, that type of thing. They recently had a large celebration for Palongo Days, which is African High Feast Day, and that went off really well. It was the first time, it was their second celebration, yearly celebration, but it was the first time that it was really successfully done. They had a beauty pageant, talent show, workshops in the morning.
On the workshop session, what was the topic or some of the topics that were discussed in the workshop session?
Well, in the workshop during Palongo days, there was only two topics. One was alcohol and drug dependency, and Prue had a resource person brought in from the Alcohol and Drug Commission to speak on drug addiction, liquor, alcoholism, all of these topics. He gave a very interesting talk on where you can go for help, if you suspect someone on the job, all different things dealing with drug dependency and alcoholism. The second topic was me. I was
Yes.
up there talking about my job, trying to get more people to come in and use me as a resource person, which is what I am. Not a lot of the community has knowledge of my services yet, so every chance I get out there and try to publicize myself.
Right. Well, we're going to talk to you a bit later about just what you do as an outreach worker. Before I move on to that, though, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the black community in St. John. Is it an old community? Has it been there for a long time? Where do blacks live in St. John, and what are some of the prominent names of blacks in St. John? That's a series of questions. Really. How long have blacks been in St. John?
Since approximately 1784. They have the African settlements on the outskirts of St. John. They were not directly into St. John. African land grants. But a lot of black people started to move into the city, or they left. Some of them came to Nova Scotia, going through the Sierra Leone thing. Some of them came into the city. Some of them have just left the province altogether. It depends on a lot of things. If you couldn't find work, if your land wasn't good enough, if your land wasn't cleared, you want schools for your children, housing. There's a number of factors.
Has the population, the black community there now larger than it was, historically speaking, or is it like a lot of other communities, the black community is starting to diminish?
It has diminished. I wouldn't be able to give you any figures on it, but in my opinion, it has diminished.
Now, is there an area in St. John where the black people predominantly live, or do they live throughout the city?
No, there is no set area now. Maybe if you look 10 years ago, you would see the Crescent Valley area was predominantly black. Black River Road area, there were a lot of black people in that area. But now people have spread out all over the city, which makes it hard to have a unified base, a unified black community base.
Because they're geographically split.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what about blacks in New Brunswick? Are there other sizable populations of blacks in New Brunswick, or is the St. John black community the largest community?
I couldn't really say it was the largest community, and certainly the community is the most active.
Do you find that people come from where St. John is perhaps the largest city in the province of New Brunswick? Do you see the same phenomenon as we see here, where a lot of people come from outside communities, the smaller communities, into the metropolitan area? Do you see some of that, people coming in from Elm Hill and Fredericton and so on in St. John?
Yeah.
Is there close links between these rural communities and the black community there in St. John?
No. Different organizations have tried to get some of the other communities in New Brunswick to join in with them. It's maybe they're not ready yet, or they don't really know the people in the different areas of the province. There has been very little response.
The black communities outside of St. John, though, are fairly small communities, I would think.
Yeah.
Right. Well, now, I'd like to move over and talk a bit about you and your job. How did you get this job as an employment counselor, or why did you want to do this particular job?
Well, there was
apart from the money and so and so.
There was a small ad in the paper in the St. John Evening Times Globe. It had employment counselor, black community, and the qualifications listed were good judgment, pleasing personality. So I said, well, geez, that looks pretty good. I'll try that. So I went for the interview, and they hired me.
Is the job you're doing now, was it related to the kinds of things you were doing beforehand?
Not at all.
Yeah.
I was working as an assistant manager at McDonald's. I don't know where that came from, but...
Yeah. Well, now, let's talk a bit about the employment situation for blacks in St. John. From your work over the last 9 months, how would you describe the employment situation in St. John for blacks?
Not good.
Not good?
Not good at all. The problem is the skill level. That is one of my main thrusts. Get more education. That's exactly what you need is more education. I'm not saying that once everyone has a university degree that there will be jobs for everyone there. At least you'll be able to compete.
Hmm. Well, now, what sectors of the economy are blacks employed in? What kinds of jobs do they have?
Service.
Primarily service?
Primarily service.
In what kinds of institutions? Government institutions, or what kinds of
No,
situations?
labor force, construction work,
Yes.
semi-skilled trades, hotel maids. There's very few other occupations. Like, it's an exception. Instead of, you wouldn't have 4 or 5 people, 4 or 5 black people working in an office together. It's very rare to see that. Most of it is just maid work or cleaning.
What about retail sales and so on? That's an area where a lot of the blacks get in at the entry level. Are there many blacks in department stores, banks, that kind of thing?
About 5 or 6.
Mhm.
I could pretty well name them right off. There's only about 5 or 6.
Right. What about affirmative action with government and so on, with the civil service, the public service commission there? Is there any affirmative action programs that have been mounted to?
No, we don't have affirmative action programs in New Brunswick. The civil service has the equal employment opportunity programs. They are not the same as an affirmative action program in that they're not identifying you as a black person, therefore you should get a little bit higher up on that list, or you should at least get an interview for this job if you have the qualifications.
What does the equal employment program do in its present form?
I hate to talk about government. I really can't see what it does.
Yeah, there's a need for improvement in that area. Will this be one of the things, one of the activities that you'll be pursuing, perhaps, as part of your activities, trying to get some affirmative action programs implemented?
Oh, definitely. That's why I'm here in Halifax. I came to see what you guys are doing. Maybe I can use some of it. What I would like to do is, one idea that I got from talking with you the last time we had met was get everybody registered. Then they can say, okay, this is a black person. Oh, at least I better hire them because she's going to be on my back anyway if I don't. It doesn't matter how I get that person to that job interview. If they're good enough, they should have the job.
Well, now, what are some of the things that you've attempted to do? What basically is your terms of reference for your project?
I don't understand your question in my terms of reference.
Well, what kinds of objectives have you set for yourself for the project? What kinds of things have you contracted with the department to do with your outreach project?
Well, I'm supposed to extend the services of the CEIC, which is the Canada Employment and Immigration, to the black community of St. John. I work only with the greater St. John area. I'm supposed to counsel intensively with women that would like to re-enter the workforce or are entering the workforce for the first time. Also, look at training, make the black community realize that there are other methods other than directly into a job placement, and also in-depth counseling, because a lot of times people, they're not ready for a job. They have social problems, they have cultural problems. There could be any number of things that would be a barrier to them in an employment situation.
How much utilization of manpower services was there in the black community prior to the project coming into being?
Very little, very little. If I can set up a project and the first 60 people that I see are not registered with the Canada Manpower Center, it makes me wonder, well, what services were these people getting in the beginning? And also, obviously, the CEIC realized this. That's why they set the project up in the black community.
Well, now, in the 9 months, do you have any idea of roughly how many blacks have been registered with the CEIC as a result of your project?
No, no.
Would it be 100 or so, more or less, roughly?
I really couldn't say.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I don't keep a record that way.
I see. All right. What about your relationship with the project, with the CEIC office? Has it been a good working relationship?
For the most part, it has. The CEIC office, I don't think they were prepared for a black outreach person. They have in St. John other outreach projects dealing with the blind, the hearing, ex-parolees or ex-inmates. I don't really think that they're ready for a black outreach person because they really don't look at the black people as having any barriers, unless you're a very low-level intelligent person, and then they can put you into special needs or send you off into little pockets. So in the beginning, I got the impression that the CEIC wanted me as an outreach person just to funnel all my people into them. And it's not working that way. The black people would not go into the CEIC in the beginning, so why should they want to go in with me holding their hand type of thing? They want the services, but they really don't, they're not ready to go busting in through the doors of the CEIC yet, because there are so many other problems.
What have been some of the successes that you consider you've encountered in the 9 months that you've been working to this point, or is it too early to talk about successes?
You can look at small successes, but how can you really say, well, what's a small success and what's a large success? You could even look at how you measure success. Anytime someone gets a full-time job from me and they stay at that job for any length of time, okay, if someone got a full-time job when I started and they started with me and they're still at that job, I look at that as a success. If I put someone in a training course and they've completed that training course and they're in a job in that field, that's a success.
What kinds of placements have you been able to make in the short time that you've been operating in terms of jobs and so on?
Most of them have been in sales positions, sales clerks. For some reason, I get a lot of calls about security companies. A lot of small security companies are starting up in St. John now. And I get a lot of calls, could you send me over some people? I'd like to see some people. I put a lot of people into TWS programs.
TWS, you have to break the jargon down now for our viewers who won't
Training in a work situation.
Yes.
Those are programs for people that are on social assistance. You want to get them off social assistance, get them back into the workforce. They're usually 16 to 20-week training programs sponsored by the provincial government. I don't know if you have them here in Nova Scotia or not,
Yes, I
but
think we have.
they work very well for people, at least for the short term. It takes them off social assistance, gives them a little bit of confidence in themselves, which is so important, that you need the confidence to be able to go in there for an interview. I put people in special needs programs. I hate to get into lettering again. Canada Manpower Industrial Training Programs, which are usually the ones I use are for special needs people. People that, if they haven't worked for the last 5 or 10 years, it feels really good when you say, here, would you like to go for this interview? And they say yes, and they come back and they say, I got the job. That just makes your day.
Well, now, what success rate have you had with the people that you're putting on the temporary, I think it was a temporary work program? Have people been able, have they stayed in the workforce after the temporary work program has gone? Or
It's about half and half.
what has
It's
been
about half and
what's
half.
the biggest factor there? Is it something to do with the individual themselves, or the fact that the jobs are not long-term jobs, or a combination?
It's long-term. They're not long-term jobs. You know that when you go into it, that it's not a long-term job. But at least you're getting that little bit of experience. At least you can say to the next person that you apply for a job with that, yes, I have worked, and I've worked recently, I've done this, and this. It's a lot better than saying, no, I haven't worked at all.
Right. Well, now, you mentioned that you have special emphasis on women, to intensive counseling with black women. What is the situation with black women? Do you have a number of unemployed black women? Are they single parents, or are they people who who've been in the workforce, who've been out for a while, or just what is the situation with the women?
It's a combination of everything you've already said. We have a lot of single parents. And the majority is women. It's very rare that you see a man who has his children. I don't know how it is here, but that's the way it is in St. John. We have a lot of women on social assistance who are single parents, who haven't worked for a number of years, and now they feel that they're ready to go back into the labor force.
Would they be the greatest of the unemployed people in the community? Would the greatest number of them be women?
I really don't know whether I could say they are women or men.
Right. Roughly, what would be your best guess? I know you said earlier that you don't have the complete statistical information yet, and you're working on that. But what would be your best guess of the rate of unemployment in the St. John black community?
40 to 50%.
40 to 50. There are traditional groups normally that you look to. What about young people, for example? How are they faring in the unemployment situation? Are they finding jobs when they're leaving school?
No, It's the young people. I deal a lot with people who are just coming out of high school or who have been out of high school for approximately 1 year, and they haven't worked during that time. Now, these people, if they go on social assistance, they only get $100 or $150 a month. They are not eligible for unemployment insurance because they've never worked. So what's happening is they're staying home with their family. And they're not really an extra burden on their family, but they can't contribute to their family also. And you get a lot of frustration there that has to be dealt with because of the fact that, well, here I am, I'm 19 years old, and I'm not working. What's the matter with me? That's a lot of the kinds of things that I have to deal with. People just, the family unit is staying together because no one can afford to move out.
Right. So I gather that you must have to do, counseling must be a big part of what you do. It must be quite difficult sometimes, with the economy being in the situation it is and so on. How do you give any kind of sense of optimism to your clients?
That's what you have to work on daily. It's just something you have to work on daily because you can't guarantee a person a job. I can't say to a person, I'll have you a job tomorrow. Maybe I will, maybe I won't, but I can't say, yes, I'll have you working tomorrow.
Well, you were talking a while ago about training, and of course I suppose a lot of these youngsters particularly, and maybe even the women and maybe even general community people who've been unemployed, the skill level may be a barrier. How successful have you been in getting people placed in training?
Not too successful. I can get people on the waiting list, but they have to wait in line just like everyone else. In St. John, we don't have a special needs seat at the community college or any other place where the government has training facilities. We need a special seat set aside so that in each course we can say, this is a black person's seat. There will be a black person in here, but as of yet we do not have anything like that. So they have to wait in line. They could wait 6 weeks, 2 weeks, they could wait 6 years. 6 years may be a little bit too much. They could wait 3 years, 4 years. They're telling them at Manpower now.
I see. So have you been making representations to Manpower in terms of making the special needs seat available that you've been talking about?
No, it's just something that we're just starting to look into.
Right. What about we're going back to the women now, one of the programs I understand that's available from Manpower is I think it's called the Career Exploration Program for Women. Have you had any involvement with that particular program?
No.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now, we talked about successes, and you said how rewarding it is when you're able to put a person in training or you're able to put a person into a program and so on. What about the other side of the coin? What are some of the biggest barriers that you confront?
A lot of times it's attitude.
Attitude on the part of the client, you mean?
Mm-hmm. A lot of people have a chip on their shoulder. If they don't have the skills and they are competing for a position with someone else, and they don't win out because they do not have the skills, sometimes it's because I'm black, and they're using it as a crutch. Other times, definitely, it's there because they're black, they're not getting that job. But a lot of times it is just attitude. It's just frustration. So you look for a crutch.
How do you deal with somebody like that? How do you turn them around?
Talk and talk and talk.
Have you been? We were talking earlier, and you were saying that you've tried to convince a lot of the younger people, particularly, to go back to school. To try to get. Have you been successful in getting a number of them to do that?
Yep. Some of the universities in New Brunswick also have affirmative action programs. So anything I can do, like I'm not a bank, I can't give them the funds to go, but I can certainly say, okay, if you need student loans, here are the forms. If you need any help filling them out, let me help you. Do you know this university has this to offer you? Do you know you can go here and take this from this university? These are things you should be looking into. Anything I can do to help get them there and to see them stay there, I'll do, but I can't go for them.
I gather, too, that you would have to have a fair amount of contact with other agencies in the community. Is this so? You have to do a fair amount of work with social assistants and other agencies and so on?
Yeah. I have to familiarize myself with their programs because if something comes up that I can't handle, I have to know where to send that person so they can get help.
How have you found the relationship with the other agencies? Have they generally been supportive of your client group?
Sometimes I have to bring it to their attention that, yes, we are a special needs group. Yes, we are a targeted group. Sometimes it doesn't really matter.
They don't give the level of service that you'd like to see sometimes. Then.
Yeah.
Right.
It could be due to they have a large client load of their own. They just don't have the time.
I guess perhaps a lot of the agencies that I know here in Nova Scotia, there's a tremendous amount of unemployment, and this has got a lot of the social agencies overburdened. I guess the situation would be similar. But there's a fair amount of construction going on. I was surprised last time I was in St. John, a lot of building with the New Market Square and so on. Has that had any impact on the economy in the area, and have any of your clients been able to benefit from that construction?
No. It has certainly had an impact on the economy. The construction end of it itself, you're talking about the New Market Square complex,
yes, right.
Was mostly union people. You very rarely see black people in the union in St. John. Now that it's opened, we've placed 5 people in the Market Square complex working. I'd say altogether there are about 15 black people working in the complex. But it's like a new shopping mall. I'm sort of pessimistic about it. You need maybe 20 people to open, but maybe 4 months down the road you'll only need 10 of those people. So I'm wondering what's going to happen then.
Some of the jobs may not be.
They might not be there.
Right, right. Well, now, going back to the CEIC office, when jobs become available at the CEIC office, does that information automatically passed on to you?
No, I visit the CEIC office at least twice a week and look at their job orders or if there are any special programs coming up. Usually, if there are special needs programs, they will call me and alert me about them to see if I have any clients that might be able to fit into them. Other than them passing me their job orders, no, that doesn't happen.
They don't pass them to you automatically?
No.
You have to go and...
I go and look.
That must make it a little bit awkward for you, doesn't it?
It does at times, yes.
Yeah. Have you pursued this matter with the management, or is this something that's coming up as well?
No, this is something that we're going to be working on also.
But generally speaking, you find the CEIC is, well, I think we talked on this before. You're saying the CEIC, there's some room for some improvement there, that they weren't quite prepared for the...
That's exactly it. They don't really, some of the counselors don't really know what I'm doing.
I see. This is still the same now, 9 months after you've been in the field. What kind of contact, other than going into the CEIC office for the job referrals and so on, or getting a call, what kind of contact do you have with the counselors? Do you have sessions together? Do you participate in their staff sessions or anything like that?
No, nothing. The only contact I have with the counselors, some of them I've never even met. Some of them I've met and I recognize their face, so I'll say hello to them when I walk by. There are just certain ones that I deal with all the time.
Well, now, in the few seconds that we have left on today's program, how would you say the program is generally received by the black community in St. John?
Very slowly.
They're very cautious about it, are they?
Very, very cautious. It's something that is growing, though. We are definitely, I know the project will be there for a couple of years at least.
Right. Well, Laurie, I want to thank you for coming along and talking a bit to us about your experiences as an employment counselor in St. John. I want to wish you the best of luck with your project. I hope that what you say will be right, that the Outreach Project will be there, that it will grow, and that you'll continue to do the good job that you've been doing to this point. We want to thank you all for watching our program today and invite you back next week. Thank you for watching. Hello, welcome to another Black Horizons program. We want to thank you for taking time out to join us once again. I'm your host, Hamid Rasheed. In today's program, we'll be discussing the recent elections in Nigeria. As many of you will recall, last week, the African country of Nigeria, one of the world's largest democracies, conducted presidential elections. In today's program, we will examine the structure of the political system of Nigeria, the recent presidential election, and its importance for the immediate future of Nigeria. I have joining me on the program as my guest to discuss the elections, Celestine Bassey, who is a resident of Calabar in Crossroads State, Nigeria. Celestine is currently at Dalhousie, where he is about to finish his doctoral work in the political science department. Brother Celestine, welcome back to the Black Horizons program.
Thank you very much, Hamid.
Always a pleasure to have you with us. I understand you've just recently returned from Nigeria, is that correct?
Yeah, I was there for research from a period lasting from November last year, to April this year.
So you've been in touch with all of the feeling and all of the issues going into the current presidential election.
Yeah, very much so.
Well, before we actually get into the discussion of the election itself, I think it might be helpful for those people who are watching the program who may not be completely familiar with the structure of the political system in Nigeria, if I could have you perhaps just explain how the political system of Nigeria is structured.
Yeah. Well, the system in Nigeria is simply a modification, of the presidential system in the United States.
Yes.
And it's, of course, based on multi-state federalism, divisions. We have 19 states and we have the federal center, and those 19 states, just as much as in the United States, have evident element of autonomy in terms of judiciary, executive, and administrative power. But again, they are also subject to federal vetoes, on a whole array of questions, especially involving fiscal policy. So it's a political system that is based on a division of 19 states, and it is also a presidential system, which in many ways is just a modification of the system in the United States. Well, you of course know that this has not been so before. In the first republic, that's from 1960 to 1966, what we had there was a regional-based federalism.
Yes.
There were about 4 dominant regions, under the federal center. This, to a certain extent, did not work because it excluded the minority from the minority elements in the country, from having a direct, participation in the federal center. And of course, there was the issues of secession, involving some of the minority areas, which eventually collapsed, under the military intervention and the civil war. So this system was actually designed, first of all, to correct some of the asymmetries, we had in the first political system, in the First Republic, and secondly also to give the minority section of the country, I come from one of those minority section, a direct participation in the federal center, and to that extent also to break, the colossus of the North, which has constituted over 60% of the voting power in the parliamentary system of the Republic, of the First Republic. So what this presidential system and the multi-state federalism has simply done is to deny any one region dominance, at the federal center and the affairs of Nigeria, by balkanizing the whole country, within 19 state units. And to a certain extent, this seems to work. And since the initiation of the system, 1979, Nigeria hasn't had too much problem with the structure as such. What other problems had cropped up, had been with political differences between certain parties, which I think we may have later discussed in this program.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, states are very important in the whole electoral process, are they not? Can you tell us a bit about that? How the role? I understand, for example, on the Constitution, a presidential candidate must win a certain percentage of the states and so on to vote in the states.
Yeah. Well, as you can see, from this map, this is the map representing the voting pattern of 1979 to 1983.
Yes.
And what you can see here is that, like the ruling party, the MPN, had to sweep the states in green all over. So what it simply means is that...
Maybe we could just get you to put this down a little bit here so the camera can get it in focus. Okay, there you go.
So as you can see, the areas in green represent those states that were won by the ruling party, the MPN party, in 1979. So what this system actually does is that, unlike the First Republic, where a presidential system may, where a president may be able to come to power at the federal center by winning the regions in the north, this system forces the president, by having the president win at least 2/3 of the states, to see that the voting distribution pattern, involved would actually, spread through the country. So if a president, for instance, cannot win, at least in other major regions of the country, apart from where he comes from, then it's virtually impossible that, such, executive officer, will be allowed, formally to take office in Nigeria. So what it has simply done is that, by making, the precondition, for the federal president to be based on winning at least 2/3, of the states in the country. So it has ensured, to a certain extent, the liquidation of regional parochialism in terms of voting pattern. So the president has not only to win from the region like Shagari, who comes from the north. In the First Republic, it could have been very easy for Shagari to sweep the northern votes, and then become the president of the country. But now, the system is such that Shagari has to win from other regions of the country, like he has to win from the north, from the middle belt, from the eastern region, as well as part of the western region. But in order to win 2/3 of the states, you have to make sure that the presidency, of course, has to win from other regions of the country. Since the north, for instance, only has 6 states, and it just has to win from other regions of the country. That, as I said, has helped, to mitigate the vicious regional parochialism that existed in the first system, and to a certain extent gives the president at least a broad-based support, whoever becomes the president, in terms of state distribution pattern of votes. And he has to win at least 25% of the vote in any state, considering the fact that there are about 6 candidates this time that contested for the election. So the overall impression that this system is designed to reinforce is that a president of Nigeria has to be a president of Nigeria, not just a president who came to power from the support of one section of the country, like the North, who under the First Republic, being in the majority of the population, 60%, could easily help someone to power as the president of Nigeria. And this, to a certain extent, had been broken under this particular design.
Right.
Yeah.
The current number of states, that's 19.
Yeah.
Has there been a recent addition to states? A year or so ago, was there not quite an issue over the creation of new states?
Yeah, it was quite an issue. I mean, in fact, one could see that while I was in the country, that the House of Representatives did tentatively approve about 19 additional states, but the Senate rejected it because they felt that there were no basis. The criteria for the creation of new states is nothing more than the fact that people in certain areas actually wish to break away from some of the states that they live in. Since the criteria, if the divisions of states is based on such criteria, like ethnic chauvinism, then there's no extent to which state creation could be limited in Nigeria. But what the Senate did do is that they indicated that historically there are at least 2 areas in which most states might be created, and that's in the Cross River State, who had been campaigning for at least what they call the Coast State, since that's the Calabar Ogoja State, since the beginning of the 50s, while the British were still in power in Nigeria. And the other section, of course, is the Kaduna region, the state in the north. But again, the Senate has made it mandatory that, there has to be a referendum in this area, before any consideration of the creation of states actually proceed. But again, as I said, there had been a lot of political exercise, in terms of, of course, the senators, who, of course, may want to keep their own political, political stay in power, longer than necessary, of course, by supporting, some of their, it's not totally incipient, some of their groups, in different parts of the Federation who have asked for state. But as I said, considering the fact that, not only the House of Representatives that has absolute control of this issue, the Senate has to vote, and finally, at least the presidential veto is a cardinal factor in any creation of the state. So in spite of the fact that at least there were tentative recommendation of 19 to 29 new states, nothing has actually come out of it. I don't really think the present president, had operated on the platform in 1979 of the creation of new states. But I think, from what we have seen so far, that he himself had been very tardy about, implementing such a policy, because they know that, it's a potential quicksand. And then there just has to be a limit drawn somewhere, about the creation of states in Nigeria.
Mm-hmm. So then with the presidential system in Nigeria, you would then have a president. There's a Senate.
Yeah.
There are governors of the states.
Mm-hmm.
And is there also a House of Representatives?
Yeah, well, within our Senate, Congress is called the National Assembly. Within the National Assembly, you have the Senate, and then that's the upper house and the lower house.
I see.
So the Senate is, representations are directly from the states. All the states are divided into what we call senatorial districts.
Yes.
And then the local government area. This is an attempt, to bring the government, especially the federal center, right down to the root of political life in Nigeria. So every state is divided into 5 senatorial districts now, and all being directly represented in the federal center. As I said, part of this was to help the minorities, to be directly represented on the center, and to circumvent, the sort of bottleneck and stranglehold that was visible, like among the thieves in the northern region, during the First Republic, who had to take to the warpath, in order to redress some of their grievances, against the dominant Hausa Fulani MPP party of that particular time. So, the MPN party then. So we have senatorial districts now in each of the states, and these senators, directly represent the state in the House of Senate. Then again, we have also representation from the states, to the lower house. Mm-hmm. So as I said, it has been parcel of the design, to see that at least the federal center is reflected right down at the roots, of the Nigerian political system. And this, to me, to a certain extent, seems to work, because I've seen qualitative change, in terms of people's attitude towards politics, and in terms of level of participation, even at the local government area, in the political process, knowing that, their voice could be heard at the center through this particular political system. And of course, the often of limits, that's the material aspect of it. But also we have to realize that, the local government areas within the states, are directly financed from the federal center. Mm-hmm. And to that extent, since the appropriation and authorization of such finance comes from the National Assembly, to that extent, you've seen that, there's a process of integration of the local government root areas in Nigerian political life directly on the federal center.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, I understand that this current election is only the second election that's been held in Nigeria in recent times.
Yeah.
Is that a function of the previous political system, as you were mentioning earlier?
Well, as I said, the Nigerian First Republic was a democratic system, the one that lasted from 1960 to 66. But just because of certain asymmetries, within the system, the system collapsed. So the last election we had in Nigeria was in the 64-65 era. After that, there was a period of turmoil, army intervention in politics in 66 and the subsequent civil war that lasted until 1970. But again, there was a whole process of reconstruction and redesigning of the Nigerian political system, and that kept the military in power until 1979, a period that they set aside and which they willingly retired from politics. So the first election we had, in the last decade, in the 70s was in 1979, and that was the presidential election that brought Shagari to power. And the election this year is the second election. The Nigerian there has to be election every 4 years in Nigeria.
Yes.
And the presidency of Nigeria is only entitled to 2 terms in office. So Shagari, who has now won again, to stay back in office in another 4 years, can only stay there, until 1987. But beyond that, he can no longer contest for an election. So there's a definite limit, on the time, which the presidency could, a particular candidate, could stay in power as the president. And also that at least if the process lasts, we shall be also having an election every 4 years. Just as much as you see in the United States.
Right.
So.
Well, I want to come back and deal a bit with your interpretation of the current election results. But before I do that, I'd like to have some discussion of the political parties in some of the issues in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Could you tell us something about the background of the various political parties, what ideological perspectives they represent, and so on?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, to the extent that ideology is relevant in Nigeria, and in Africa in general, that's the type of ideology that we know about in the West, like capitalism or Marxism or socialism as other variants, What we really have in Nigeria is that, out of the 5 major parties, one could really see that, it is only one party, that's the UPN, under Chief Obafemi Awolowo, which tends to, to digress, from the normal enterprise pattern, that you find in Nigerian, in the Nigerian social system. So what Awolowo may represent is almost what might call a socialist. That's Awolowo and his party, the UPN, is a socialist ideological orientation in Nigeria. And to a certain extent, they've been able to implement this in the 5 states that they control in the Federation. And they've had something like free education from secondary school to university level. They've had something like free Medicare system, direct assistance to the poor, and a whole range, of what might call socialist principles, that have been reintroduced into the Nigerian political arena. But again, I should say that, this could be very misleading, because if you see the other parties, like the dominant party, presently in power in Nigeria, the MPN, although, their policies are to a certain extent the liberal capitalist type. They believe in, at least to a certain degree, of free enterprise. If anything like free enterprise really does exist in any way in the world, at least there's a tendency towards export orientation, and to a certain extent a pro-Western policy in terms of economic relations, and other fiscal policies. So to that extent, you could see that there's an element of ideological division in the country, reflecting, 3 parties on the one hand and 2 other parties. In fact, there's a new party called NAP, Nigerian Advanced Party, and Obafemi Awolowo's party on the second hand. But again, I would really see the situation more as a pragmatic, tendencies, within the Nigerian body politic, rather than rigid ideological divisions, that people knew about in terms of communism or communism, socialism, or liberal capitalism on the one hand. I would think more in terms of pragmatic political considerations or policy considerations within the Nigerian body politic. Those socialist principles that Awolowo's party have been able to affect in 5 regions of the Federation are not necessarily actually exclusive. But what really happens is that, Awolowo himself, had actually followed these policies, since he was the premier in the West. Yet again, considering, the tone of the divergence between the UPN and the MPP. To that extent, you could say that there's an element of ideological division, between these 2 parties. Yeah.
Well, now, what was the major issue or issues going into this particular presidential election?
Well, I would say that the issue was preeminently domestic. It has to do with the economic issues. Well, that Nigerian economy had its exaggerated share, of the oil market, and to that extent, the foreign exchange and other revenues sources, had been based on oil. On the income, derived from oil sale. But since the collapse, at least the glut in the world market, since a year ago, Nigerian economy, has experienced a very hard time, in terms of implementation of basic development plans. And to a certain extent, the opposition, like that of Awolowo's party, were right in blaming, some of, vacancies, in Nigerian political life on the policies of the ruling government, because when it was first realized that, there was an outglut, I mean, there are certain measures the government should have taken to preserve at least, some foreign exchange for the country. But that laissez-faire policy actually continued, and some of their grandiose plans, like the development of new capital, were not even extended, but they were kept actually on track. And of course, that all these things involve, enormous imports, and the foreign exchange reserve of Nigeria. So the economy, was a basic issue, in the election, and I would say the preeminent issue. But also other issues, touching on, foreign policy were involved. The Socialist Party, for instance, if I may call the UPN, had been very critical of Shagari for his pro-Western, exaggerated pro-Western policies. They could have felt more comfortable, to see the sort of foreign policy trend, that exists under the military, what might call at least a neutral stance, between the East and the Western Bloc. So to that extent, we have seen that in issues, for instance, involving Chad, Nigeria had been very active in the 70s as an independent actor. In fact, the accord that led to the settlement, at least for a year or two, between the warring factions in Chad were hammered out in Nigeria under the auspices of the military, the Kano Accord. These are the type of neutral, independent, dynamic, and active foreign policy involvement that the opposition would want to see continued. But of course, Shagari, partly for temperamental reasons, and partly also, I think, because of policy differences, would rather play it, in terms of the self-effacement and the self-effacement policy, and what might call quiet diplomacy that characterized the Nigerian foreign policy in the first 6 years of its independence. Don't talk, don't be too active, keep to the background, but at the same time, try to pull the string. The type of quiet diplomacy that we saw in the First Republic is what, Shagari administration has resurrected, but people are not, Nigerians in general, feel that the time has come that, that type of dynamic involvement of Nigeria in Angola and in former Rhodesia and other African issues, should be continued unabated. But again, I would really accord Shagari, to a certain extent, at least a positive commendation in terms of his statement-like, behavior in some of the issues, like violation of the Nigerian territorial integrity, by a neighboring country like Cameroon, and the accidental shooting of the 5 Nigerian servicemen. Well, under perhaps a presidency like Obafemi Awolowo, he could have taken retaliatory measures, but Shagari was able to contain it. And we've seen recently, there was an exchange, not really an exchange, some rebel factions in Chad occupying some strategic islands in the Chad belonging to Nigeria. Well, Nigeria has to take some measures to drive them out, so there was some military operation within the Chad basin. But the sort of escalation that the military wanted to teach Chad and neighboring countries a lesson that they could not, flout the Nigerian integrity and get away with. That is a limited, retaliatory attack and push into Chad was actually stopped by the Shagari administration. So it is this type of, flexible and to a certain extent restraint policy, that I personally and others would really commend Shagari for. Because the Nigerian role in at least that regional subsystem in Africa is so sensitive that if Nigeria starts flexing its muzzle that it has, it will only end up alienating, its neighbors, like what you've seen in Northern Africa involving Libya, for instance. So to that extent, Shagari, had been statement-like, and to a certain extent, his diplomacy is quite commendable. But I still feel that in certain issue areas, in Nigerian foreign policy, we need a little element of dynamism, that followed the military regime of the Mohamed Obasanjo era.
Right. Well, I'd like to turn now to the outcome of the presidential election.
Yeah.
Shagari won the election by what appears to be quite decisive measures. I think there was a 3 or 4 million spread between he and his nearest competitor. How would you interpret the results of the election?
Yeah, it came as a surprise to me also. I mean, I'm sure many Nigerians were actually surprised. But in retrospect, I think what really happened was that, as you can see, that in the southern states, the states in the southern region, Shagari was running head-to-head, with Chief Bafemi Awolowo. In fact, Awolowo, that's one of the major opposition party. The UPN was quite ahead, in certain areas of the south.
Yes.
But what really happens in the north is that, you see, in the first election of '79, the north was split was split, along other party lines, Like, for instance, the GNPP controls certain states in the north, about 2 states in the north, and the PRP, control about 4 states in the north. So what Shagari actually won was the middle belt. I think what we actually saw, because the massive votes, that helped Shagari back in power came from the north. And the main reason, I think, is, first of all, that one of the veteran politicians of the north, the leader of the PRP party, Aminu Kano, died recently.
Yes.
And it has been one of the most popular politicians in the north, and a person that could have actually created a bit of a problem for Shagari in the north by getting votes away from him. So what happened that he died, and the other party, under GNPP, under Waziri is not very interested in politics. In fact, he gets out of politics and back in politics. So it was these two, elements, the fact that one of the veteran northern politicians died, and secondly, one of other politicians that could have contested, with Shagari about the northern states, was not very interested, in politics as such, because he stepped out and back into his business. And one could have expected that I think this was the factor that finally gave Shagari the command, to sweep most of the northern states, that he could not win in 1979 election.
Right.
So.
Well, we're fast running out of time in the few minutes that we have remaining.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you, what do you think the impact of the gubernatorial and the senatorial races will be, and what is your general prognosis for the next 4 years in Nigeria? Will it be what do you think the future holds?
Yeah, well, I think I haven't really, the results of we've had, some at least not substantiated, results about the governorship election. It appears the MPN is doing fine, and in other parts of the federation, other parties are also, winning. And that of the senatorial election hasn't actually taken place yet. But as a general overview of my impression of Nigeria in the future, I think it will depend on the extent to which, the center holds, once, for instance, Shagari cannot arrest the trend, towards crass corruption, among his senior political leaders, this could at least create the room for intervention of the military, which cannot be totally ruled out. But as long as at least there's a certain element of sanity in the system,
yes.
I think this is the best political system Nigeria could have and hope to have. I don't think a dictatorship will ever work in Nigeria. It won't, not only because of the level of awareness in terms of education, but also because of the diversity of the country. If a dictator arises from one part of the country, is bound to meet serious opposition from other parts of the country. This is problem of the highly plural system that Nigeria is. So I think this is the best system Nigeria could ever hope to have. And if there's an element of sanity, within the systems, especially among the policy makers and the bureaucrats, I think the system will survive for quite a long time. But if the type of crass, unconcern, I've seen in certain areas of the Nigerian bureaucracy and even among the legislators, who to a certain extent, have been out there, just to cater for themselves rather than those who elected them, then I think we may be heading for another period of trouble in Nigeria. But again, this could sound too pessimistic, and I only hope that, the present trend, in the Nigerian, that the democratic polity actually lasts, because I think this is a system that may allow, at least in a decade, a saner elements, to get into some of the areas that I feel that need some correction, within the Nigerian body politics.
Well, Celestine, we
Yeah.
want to thank you. I'm sorry they won't have more time to go into all of the impact of the current election.
Yeah.
But we want to thank you all for watching and invite you back next week. Thank you for watching.
Thanks.